The Dannemora prison break was one of the most shocking and daring prison escapes in modern American history. It happened in 2015 at the Clinton Correctional Facility, a large maximum security prison in the small town of Dannemora, New York. The escape involved two inmates, Richard Matt and David Sweat, who managed to break out of one of the most secure prisons in the state. What made the event even more surprising was that they had help from inside the prison, from people who worked there. The story that followed, the escape, the manhunt, and the eventual capture, seemed almost like something from a movie, which is why many people called it the real-life Shawshank, referring to the famous film The Shawshank Redemption, where a prisoner escapes through a tunnel after years of digging. The Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora is one of the oldest and most well-known prisons in New York State. It was built in the 1800s and is surrounded by tall concrete walls, barbed wire, and guard towers. It houses some of the most dangerous criminals, including murderers and violent offenders. The prison is known for being tough and cold, both in temperature and in atmosphere. Since Dannemora is located in the far north of New York, near the Canadian border. Richard Matt and David Sweat, the two prisoners who escaped, were not ordinary inmates. Both were serving long sentences for violent crimes. Richard Matt, then 48 years old, had been convicted of kidnapping, torturing, and killing his former boss in 1997. He was known for being manipulative, charming, and artistic. He often painted portraits of famous people for guards and other inmates. David Sweat, 34 at the time of the escape, was serving a life sentence for killing a sheriff's deputy in 2002. He was considered quiet, but smart and resourceful. Despite their differences, the two men became close friends inside prison. They were both skilled with their hands and worked in the prison's tailor shop, where inmates made clothes and repaired uniforms. This workshop gave them access to tools and areas that most prisoners couldn't reach. Over time, they began to plan their escape carefully, step by step. One of the most shocking parts of the story was how two prison employees helped the men escape, one knowingly and one unknowingly. The first and most important helper was Joyce Mitchell, a middle-aged woman who worked as a prison tailor shop supervisor. She was married and had worked at the prison for years. Over time, she developed close relationships with both Matt and Sweat. According to investigators, she became emotionally involved with them and even had a sexual relationship with Sweat. Matt, who was known for charming people, flattered her and made her feel special. She later admitted that she had fallen under their spell. Matt and Sweat used this emotional connection to manipulate Mitchell. They convinced her to help them with their escape plan. Mitchell brought them small tools and supplies hidden in frozen hamburger meat and other packages. These tools included hacksaw blades, drill bits, and screwdrivers, items that were crucial for their escape. They also convinced her to bring them blueprints of the prison and smuggle in other small items they needed. There was also a second employee, Gene Palmer, a veteran correctional officer who had worked at the prison for nearly 30 years. He did not realize the full extent of the plot, but had unknowingly helped by allowing the inmates to access areas behind their cells to fix pipes and electrical issues. Palmer also admitted to smuggling in paint and tools for the inmates in exchange for their artwork. Though his role was less direct, it still played a part in making the escape possible. The escape plan was both creative and extremely dangerous. It took months of planning and careful work. The men studied the prison's structure, learned the layout of the tunnels, and figured out how to move through the walls without being detected. The prisoners began by cutting holes in the back of their cells. They used hacksaw blades to slowly remove the steel panels behind their bunks. Every night, they worked for hours, hiding the noise with loud fans or covering the sound during shift changes. When they finished cutting, They crawled through the hole into a network of narrow tunnels behind the cell blocks. Once inside these maintenance tunnels, they had access to steam pipes, catwalks, and shafts that ran beneath the prison. They used flashlights and maps to find their way through this underground maze. They cut through steel pipes and walls and used the prison's steam system as a guide. The escape route eventually led them to a manhole cover outside the prison walls. To reach the outside world, they had to cut through a steel steam pipe, crawl through it for several hundred feet, and then emerge from a manhole just outside the prison perimeter, on a quiet residential street in Dannemora. Before they escaped, they left behind a taunting note in one of the tunnels that said, "Have a nice day," along with a cartoon drawing. It showed that they were proud of what they had done and felt confident they could make it. The escape happened on the night of June 5, 2015. It was a Friday, and the prison was following its usual nighttime routine. Around 10:30 p.m., Richard Matt and David Sweat slipped through the holes in their cells, crawled through the tunnels and pipes, and emerged outside the prison. When the guards made their morning bed checks at 5:30 a.m. on June 6th, they found both beds neatly made with dummy figures under the blankets, made from sweatshirts and clothes to look like sleeping prisoners. By the time the guards realized the men were gone, Matt and Sweat were long gone. The alarm was raised immediately, and the prison went into lockdown. Hundreds of police officers, state troopers, and federal agents began searching the area. Helicopters flew overhead, and checkpoints were set up across the region. The escape shocked the nation. How could two dangerous murderers get out of a maximum security prison? The search for Matt and Sweat quickly became one of the largest manhunts in New York State history. More than 1,500 law enforcement officers were involved, including local police, state troopers, and even the U.S. Border Patrol. The area around Dannemora is covered in thick forests, mountains, and small towns, making it both easy to hide and hard to search. At first, investigators believed the men might have crossed into Canada, which was only 20 miles away. But soon, they found clues suggesting that the men were still in the area. Footprints, clothing, and food wrappers were discovered in the woods near the prison. Meanwhile, the investigation inside the prison quickly led to Joyce Mitchell. She was supposed to meet the escapees outside the prison after their breakout, but she got cold feet and didn't show up. Instead, she panicked and checked herself into a hospital, claiming she was having a panic attack. When investigators questioned her, she eventually admitted to helping them and revealed key details about the escape plan. Her confession helped police narrow down the search area. For weeks, Matt and Sweat managed to stay on the run. They broke into cabins, stole food, and tried to keep moving. Locals were terrified, and entire neighborhoods were shut down as police searched house by house. After nearly 3 weeks on the run, the manhunt finally came to an end. On June 26, 2015, police received a tip about gunfire near Malone, New York, about 30 miles from the prison. When officers arrived, they found Richard Matt, who was armed with a shotgun. He refused to surrender and was shot and killed by a U.S. Border Patrol agent. 2 days later, on June 28th, police found David Sweat just a few miles from the Canadian border. He was spotted by a state trooper who recognized him walking along a rural road. When Sweat tried to run, the trooper shot him twice in the torso to stop him. He was captured alive and taken to the hospital, later returning to prison under maximum security conditions. The 23-day manhunt had finally ended. The escape caused a huge scandal for the New York State prison system. An investigation found that there were many security failures and procedural mistakes that made the escape possible. For example, guards didn't check the cells properly, tools weren't counted carefully, and relationships between staff and inmates weren't monitored closely enough. Joyce Mitchell was arrested and charged with promoting prison contraband and criminal facilitation. She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 7 years in prison, though she was released on parole in 2020. Gene Palmer, the other employee, was sentenced to 6 months in jail for his part in the incident. The state spent millions of dollars on the manhunt and repairs to the prison. Security procedures were changed, staff were retrained, and relationships between inmates and employees were more closely supervised. The story became a warning to other prisons about how easily a few mistakes and misplaced trust could lead to a disaster. The Dannemora escape reminded many people of the Shawshank Redemption, the famous 1994 film about a man who digs his way out of prison using a small rock hammer. Both stories involved clever prisoners, slow and patient digging, and secret tunnels behind the walls. But unlike the movie, the real-life story ended with violence and tragedy. Still, people were fascinated by how two men managed to do something that seemed impossible. The escape captured national attention, and in 2018, the story was turned into a TV miniseries called Escape at Dannemora, directed by Ben Stiller and starring Benicio del Toro, Paul Dano, and Patricia Arquette. The series showed how manipulation, human weakness, and poor oversight all came together to make the escape possible. The Dannemora prison break was more than just a thrilling escape story. It was a real-life lesson in how complex human behavior can be. Two dangerous criminals used intelligence, patience, and manipulation to outsmart one of the most secure prisons in the country. They took advantage of human emotions, weak systems, and small mistakes to achieve what seemed impossible. The event showed that even the toughest security systems are vulnerable when people inside them are not alert or honest. It also showed how desperation, both from inmates and from the staff, can lead to disastrous consequences. In the end, Richard Matt and David Sweat's escape did not lead to freedom. One died, and the other returned to a stricter prison. But their story lives on as one of the most dramatic real-life escapes in history. A modern Shawshank that revealed not only the flaws in the prison system, but also the dangerous power of manipulation, hope, and human error.